Hello, my name is Anna and welcome back. This tutorial has been requested from one of our channel members. It is such a popular request in actual fact, not just with Django, but with other frameworks. So just how do you upload multiple images in a Django form? Maybe you've already seen the tutorial length and you're thinking, well, that's quite a long to do something fairly simple. So I'm going to try and explain this as much as possible. I have left some links in the video description so that you can go ahead and just quickly read or have a look at some other tutorials where they kind of slim that down and compress that a little bit more. But like I said, I just wanted to try and embellish as much as possible to give you as much information as possible to help you achieve this goal. And why that is because there are just multiple ways of achieving this goal. So you are looking at the final product here. We have a form which is going to allow us to select multiple files and we can go ahead and upload those. So we submit. As an added bonus, I was just going to show you or introduce you to the Django message framework. If you haven't already started utilizing that, that's why you can see this nice little message up the top here. There isn't going to be an output here. I'm just going to be saving it via a form. And you can see here in the media folder that we're going to create, those two images have now been uploaded. If we were to inspect the database, let's go have a little look at this database down here. You'll find that we now have two new entries. Those are the images that we've just uploaded. And then we did also create a new project, just to double sure of that. And we created a new project. So everything worked perfectly. So you fully understand the scope for this tutorial. We aren't going to do anything else elaborate. Simply going to upload those images from the form into a media folder, capture them, and then record them in a database. Thinking further ahead, and maybe another tutorial, we'll recover how to manage images or when deploying your application. And generally, you're going to use some sort of cloud service to store images. So the setup would be slightly different at the back end here, where you're actually saving the images. But like I said, the scope here in this tutorial, we're just going to save our images in a media folder. There is a link in the video tutorial where you can go ahead and download this base project, which we're going to be working with in this tutorial, so that you can work through this step by step. So go ahead, download, extract into a new folder. Here I'm using Visual Studio Code, of course, and then there should be a requirements file here. So once you've created a virtual environment, there is a video and there's a link in the video description. I'll start utilizing that more so you can go ahead if you don't know how to use a virtual environment. And once you've done that, let's go ahead and pip install the requirements. So go ahead and install those and then we're good to go. So 9 times out of 10, if you're using images or working with images in your Django project, you're going to install Pillow. And that's going to give you, it's a library which is going to give you the tools to help you work with images in your Django project. Something I don't see enough of is tutorials showcasing what Pillow can do. And that just leads me down another avenue of the hundreds of things I'm thinking about creating tutorials for. So I'd be interested to know whether you want to know a little bit more about Pillow. But like I was alluding to, Pillow provides so many cool tools to help us manipulate and work with images in our project. And it's well worth going over to the handbook and having a look at some of the different features it offers. To get started with it, we just need to pip install Pillow. I think I've already done that in actual fact in the requirements file, but you just need to make sure that's installed. So one thing we do have with that is it gives us the ability to create a new field type, which allows us to store or start to think about storing images in our database. Now, we're not actually storing images in our database. You've already seen that we're going to create a folder and the images will be stored in that folder. But in the database, we're going to be storing essentially the link to or the reference to that image. So just to clear that up again, remember, we're not storing the actual image in the database, just a reference to that image. Maybe that's the name of the image or the URL to that image, for example. Now, of course, we're not limited to saving just one image or one image reference in a field, depending on what type of field type we're using. So, for example, we could utilize a JSON field and store multiple objects within inside of that JSON field within our database. So that's one other approach. However, more often or not, you'll find yourself building a separate table for images. And there's, of course, multiple approaches to this as well. So in the most simplest case, maybe you create a one-to-many relationship between a table projects and images. So in this case, you have one product associated to multiple images, and one image is just associated to one project. Now, that might not always be the case, because you might have a bank of images that you want to create. So you may end up with a many-to-many relationship between your tables, in which case you'll create some sort of link table between that. And that just expands and provides a little bit more flexibility within your application. In this case, we have one project associated to multiple images, and multiple images associated, one image, sorry, associated to multiple projects. And it means we can reuse images. In this tutorial, we're going to take the simple process of creating an image table, which is going to have a relationship, a foreign key, over to a project. So we're just going to create this one-to-many relationship in this tutorial. So just to aid our understanding, in my opinion, I know a lot of people don't like this, but I'm going to copy and paste code in and explain it. And you can pause, write it out, and then come back. But that's how I'm going to work in this tutorial. Right, so I just noticed that there's 2 line breaks there. So what we're going to need to do first then is let's go ahead and just create a new table here. And like I said, I'm just going to copy and paste this in, but I'm going to explain what's going on here for those who are new. So here we have a new table. We have the foreign key over to the project table. So that's going to create the foreign key, the connection to a product. And that's going to allow us to associate an image to a project, or whatever it is you want to associate the table you want to associate to. So here we have the name of the table, the model, and then on delete, we're going to include this, just in this case, Cascade. Now, if you're not too familiar with this approach, this is basically the behavior that's going to happen if we were to, for example, to delete a project. What would happen to the image? Because we're making a relationship between the project and the image, we need to deal with this image, because maybe what we don't want for data redundancy, we don't want there to be a case where we delete an image and then the images are just hanging around. So here we can perform an action which will take place if and when a project that an image is associated to is deleted. Now, if you want to learn more about this, there is a video not too long ago from this video in the timeline on the YouTube channel, which covers this in more details. And I'll try and link it in the video description if you're interested. Okay, so next up we have a new field type called an image field, and that's some of the tools that we're getting from Pillow. So this is why potentially in this case we installed Pillow, because it provides us these tools. More importantly is just to go over to a documentation just to see and have a look at the attributes that are available here utilizing the image field. So here we can specify, for example, the default upload path, or the upload folder where the image is going to be uploaded, and for example the height field and the width field and the max length. So there's a few different options here, and as well, just quickly reading through and familiarizing yourself with that. In this tutorial, we keep it super simple, and I'm going to remove this in actual fact. So we're just going to include the field, and then we're done there with the model. So all we need to do at this point is go ahead and, this is a good point, we're going to need to migrate and create the table. So let's start from scratch again. So I'm going to just remove the existing database. So that's gone. And then just make sure that in your project, if you go over to migrations, let's go ahead and just remove the migrations. It's a good little step to go through if you want to reset your project if you weren't already aware. So you need to get rid of the migrations, otherwise it records what changes have happened already in your database. And then when you go ahead and migrate again, it could affect the integrity of your database. So just make sure you remove those. So to get this back up and running again, we need to make migrations and migrate. In actual fact, I created a management command here that does that, and also loads some fixtures in, some user fixtures. So we can just go ahead and use that. So Python and then manage.py, and then user fixture is the name of the custom command here. So that would go ahead and make migrations and so on and get everything up and running. So we've now created our new table, which includes the image table here. So we're now up and running and ready to go. So now we need to think about some project. I'll get it right in a second. We need to think of some project. The word eludes me. Settings. Okay, let's think about some project settings for images. Right, so where are we? So inside of our core, let's go to settings. Right, so we have already installed Pillow. So we now need to think about how we're going to manage the images that we're working with. So there's a few different settings here. The first one is the media root. So apologies, at the bottom here, let's define our media root. And then the second option is then the media URL. So the first one in the media root, OS path join. Now there's a few different ways here. I've gone safe and I'm going to use OS for this, but I don't necessarily need to take this approach. And you might find other examples don't take this approach. A couple of versions ago, Python moved slightly to the base directory, and that allowed you kind of to avoid using OS, and you can access the path more directly now. So this is just a safer way, I find, of working. Having worked with students and different computers, etc., sometimes there has been some issues. So the media root is basically just telling Django where to find the media root folder. And we're going to create a folder called media. So it's referring to the base directory, which is this directory here, So we can create a new folder here called media, which is in the base directory, and there we go. So that's a reference to that folder. So we now know our media root. So the second thing we can do is also now have our media URL, because maybe we want to access it through the browser, for example. So we now know where that is going to be stored, the images /media/. So that gives us access then to the media folder again. So when you're working in this mode here, in this development mode, you're going to need to tell Django where to find this folder. So if we go into the URLs here, what we're going to do here, apologies, let's go back in the settings. Sorry, one thing I didn't mention. So because we're using the OS tools, we're just going to need to import OS. So up the top here, I did include import OS. If you're not too sure what that is, that just allows us, that allows us to interact with our operating system, the folder and file structure. That's why we're bringing that in. If you want to familiar as well with just quickly reading up, if you are new to Python and you don't know what the OS tools are. Right, so let's go back into, let's remove that. So let's go back into our URLs. Now this is the URLs not in the core, but this is going to be the URLs in the project. So we are extending the URLs from the core here to the project URLs. It just makes it easy to manage when the URLs associated to the project are inside the project folder. Right, so inside of here, we'll want to now tell Django that when we're in development mode, we want to be able to access our URL, our media folder. So we're going to bring in settings and also static, like that. And then in addition to that, we just need to add the bottom here, plus static settings.media URL, document root settings.media root. So you can see we're just telling Django where to find the settings for the media URL and the media root so that we can access that folder and work with it when we're in this development mode. So that's pretty much all the setup now. We have our database where we can store images, and we have Django now set up and ready to handle images in the background. So here in this example, we are using the Django template system. Now, we are utilizing a form as a way of the user interacting with our system. So inside of our project, there is a file here called forms already, and you can see that it has already been pre-populated. So I just want to talk about this a little bit. So here, I think we already had a form previously from the project, and I've just added this image form here. So this is the project form. So if you remember, the project model had a few fields. if you've not seen it, name, slug, description. And then this user here is just a link to the user. So we're not going to populate or generate that field. That's just a link to the user, and then the user gets associated to a project when the user creates a project. So just ignore that. So here we have some fields that we want users to type in to make a new entry in this project table. So going back to our form, here you can see that we created this form. We've associated it to the project model, and then we have 3 fields, name, slug, and description, which correlates to the project model. Now what we can do, and there's an example here, we can associate forms in the same class, if you like it. So this example here shows you how to potentially associate 2 models and create one form utilizing 2 classes. It is a little bit advanced, and I just wanted to simplify it, but it is well worth knowing that that is possible. Now, there are some difficulties or different ways of then handling that in the view. You'd need to handle that slightly differently, but I just wanted to drop that there for you to maybe explore another time. So to simplify this, we now have another form for the image. So although we're going to end up with one form, essentially we are going to be building 2 forms, one to deal with one model and one to deal with the images. So in the end game here on the template, it is going to look like one form, but we are essentially just breaking this up. So here we have the second form here for the image, and we have a image form image field. So label equals image. And then what I've done is I've just extended this using a widget. And the magic here really is using multiple in the form field. So let's go over to W3 Schools to have a look. So we're essentially going to allow multiple uploads by using the multiple attribute in the input field. And that is essentially going to allow us to upload multiple images, or give us the tools to do that. And you can see this provides you a little bit more of an overview of how that's done. We will see that in our code later. So let's just press on here. So this is done now. So you can see that we've added the multiple attribute, and that's going to be added to this, because this is just one field. You're looking at one field. This is going to generate a form with one field. And this widget here just is a way of extending or adding custom items or custom code to that field, to that input field. And what we're going to do is add multiple to that. And that's going to allow us then through HTML5 to accept multiple inputs or upload multiple images. Okay, so with that done, we now move over to the views. Right, so we already have a view here to create a new project, and we need to kind of extend this to now include the image component so we can upload images as and when we create a project. So just working through this workflow here. So this view here represents, well, we might as well get this project started. Let's just get this project. Let's get it started. Run server. Let's just check, see if everything works. So the port's already in use. So just do that again. There we go. So this is what we currently have, a login. We're going to need to log in, so admin, and then the password is password. Okay, that gives us the project listing. There is no projects. Go to a new project. So that's currently what we're looking at. So we want to extend this now to add the new image component at the bottom. So far, what we have then is we check to make sure that if, for example, a user goes to this page via a post request, so if they get to this page here via a post request, and how that's done, if I do this, what happens when I submit, it refreshes the page and it creates a post request to this page. And therefore, this piece of code then gets fired off. Now, if I don't have a post request, it means I've just gone to this page, and therefore I just need to show the user the form. So if this if statement doesn't fire off, we've got the else, and it just shows the user the form, and then we just return the user that form. You can see here the mechanics here. We capture the information in the post, and then we validate it to make sure the data is the data we're going to expect or is required. And then we go ahead and save that into the database. And then finally, we go ahead and using the reverse here, we just send the user back to a page that we want them to view once they've submitted the form. Now, there are many ways of achieving our goal here, but it's important to understand that we do want to validate. We do want to make sure that the data that the user enters isn't malicious at all. They aren't trying to attack our system. So we're trying to clean the data before we then go ahead and save. So we do want to go through that process of checking, and this form is valid is one way of achieving that. So go ahead and grab the documentation for this. So if you just type into Google is valid, that should take you to the Django documentation here. And I'm looking at using forms to validate data, and that would tell you all about clean and validating your data. So implement a clean method on your form when you must add custom validation for fields that are independent. So it just tells you about validating fields, and the primary task here then of is valid is to validate the data with a bounded form instance. So we're just basically checking to make sure that the data then corresponds with what's expected in the form. So if we go back here in our form, what we have are some fields. Those fields are connected to data types. So essentially, we're just making sure that the what the user's typing in will actually fit our model, because there's no point us trying to insert a Boolean in a field that is expecting a string, for example. So we're trying to create some validation. We're trying to clean the data from the front end that the user is trying to type in to ensure that A, it's going to fit our model, and B, they're not trying to type in something malicious, which is trying to potentially infiltrate, attack our system. So let's go ahead now and extend this. So we're going to say files equals, and then request dot files dot get list. So we're basically just going to grab the images that have now been sent across in the form. So from the request, so remember what's happened here is that the user creates the form, presses send, or presses the button in the form, and that data then gets sent over, and that's going to be inside the request. So we're going to grab that data. So here you can see inside the request, we grab the data, and this time what we've done is we've grabbed the files that are associated in that request. So first of all, then let's go back here, forms request post, request post. Okay, so we've got that data, and then files equals request files get list from the image. So we'll hook up this image eventually, because we're going to hook that into our form, which is then going to allow us to pinpoint exactly where the files are. So we go ahead and just validate the form, and then we go ahead and commit, and then we save. So at this point, the data has been saved. So the data that's been saved so far, if we go back here, is a name, slug, and description. So this here, the form will represent those three fields here. And then we've gone ahead and we've saved that component. Now, essentially what we've done here at this point, when we get to this save, is that we've saved the data that corresponds to our first model, and that's the project model. So we've just saved data into this model. Now, obviously, we want to now save data in the image model. So let's go back here. So now what we want to do is, once we've saved that, we want to check to make sure if there are any files that have been associated to this this request. So we grab the files that are associated maybe to someone maybe's added to this form, and then we're just going to loop through them. And every time we loop through them, we're just going to save them to our new database. So our model was called image. We've called our model image here. So we are going to need to bring that in. So from model, import image. For at the top here, dot models, import image. So we've added that in. So image, and then we're just going to say objects, objects.create, and then project equals F. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we've created an instance here, a new instance that's stored now in our model. So it's stored here in our project. Now we can take that instance and then we can utilize it, because inside of our model here, remember we were creating an association here. Our project needs to be associated to one of the projects inside the project model. So what we're doing here is we're just grabbing this instance and we're doing exactly that. We're associating this field project inside of our model to this instance inside the project table. And that's where we're building then that connection and entry into the first field. And then secondly, we then need to add the image. So we can say image equals I. So remember what we've done is we've grabbed the images here that have been submitted in files, and then we're going to loop through them. And then we're just then going to store that reference inside of our database. So now what we have is our project instance, which is now connected to one of the images. And of course, we loop through this. We had 5 images. It's going to loop through 5 times, create 5 new entries in our image database, which is then associated to this project. Okay, so that's really the workflow here in this example. Now you may be wondering or thinking, well, that's maybe not the best way of doing it. And this is just probably the most simplest way. One of the most simplest way of achieving our goal of saving multiple images. And there's a few things here that we might want to now expand upon, which we're not going to go in this tutorial, but I just wanted to make you aware of. So one question is, well, how are we validating this file? That's the first question. We're validating the data, but how are we validating to make sure that we're working with an image? Because maybe someone's going to upload an image type that we don't want to work with, a PNG maybe. Maybe we want to only work with JPEG files. For example, someone might accidentally upload a PDF file. So how are we going to check for that? And by default, you'll probably find that Django will do a good job of telling you that's the wrong file type. But ultimately, you do want to make your system a little bit more robust. And that's where you can start to explore some of the different tools in Pillow, for example. Maybe what you also want to do is compress this file after you save it into a database. So there may be some additional activities here. And what I've done is I've left some links in the video description again, which will take you to some different pages, which will potentially help you explore some of the ways of validating images and expanding and making a little bit more robust, your code a little bit more robust for a production. But like I said, this is kind of a baseline to help you get started. So like I said in the preview, we're going to just include the Django messaging framework here. So let's say messages. So if you haven't started working or haven't used Django messages before, it's a built-in kind of message framework which allows you to send messages, get stored in sessions. So let's go ahead and new project added. Okay, so we're creating messages. Now what we're going to need to do is import messages so we can start to utilize that toolkit. So what we've done here, there are multiple types of messages. Here we've created a success message, which is going to output new project added. So as long as this code fires off okay, and we don't get any errors, because that's another thing as well that we've not spoken about here, that we want to potentially expand here. How are we going to capture errors? Now Django will do a good job of telling us if there is any errors, but potentially for production, we want to be able to really capture those errors in a little bit more structured way. So potentially here, error control is also something else you want to consider on expanding this code. Now, right, so we've got this message here that's going to appear, and then we go ahead and we return redirect, and instead of doing a reverse. So reverse will allow us to have a look at, if you didn't know what reverse was, it will allow us to reverse. So it will allow us to find, so inside a project, that's just a reference to this app name project, and then it's reference to a named path here. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get a reverse. I'm trying to get the URL, this URL here. And then I'm basically constructing that URL. And then I'm going to basically put it here. So I'm just redirecting to that URL. That's what I'm doing there. So just to simplify that a little bit, let's just hard code that in. So that's then going to redirect and then to the project's URL. Okay. So with that in place, we're now ready to go to the front end and handle this. There's just one other thing I think we need to do here. Let me just double check. So if yes. Okay. So we could put an else here, and then we could say print form errors. Or we could do something with errors maybe. So that's something we could do. So here we've got the form for the project. We're probably also going to need the image form. Okay, so let's bring that in. Oh, that's not it. There we go. So here we've included the image form. Now, if you go back up to the top, what I've done is from forms, I've imported the image form. I didn't show that, apologies. So that just basically now imports these two forms that we're utilizing, we set up in our forms file. So if we go back to the bottom here, we now need to just pass that over. And so let's go for image form. And then we need to associate that then to image form. So on our template, to grab the image form data, we reference it via the image form. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. So that just extends that, and that leaves us with the final code of our view, just like that. Just about see all that. Okay, so now we're ready to move over to the template. So here we have a templates folder. Inside of here, we have the create project, and you can see that there is already a template here for that form that we can see right here. So we're going to need to extend this, so to add the image form so that users can then select multiple images. So let's go ahead and have a look at what that's going to look like. All right, so let's go ahead and just delete this. Let's just, well, let's just get rid of the form. We'll keep the structure in place. Okay. So let's start off by creating a new form here. So we're given an ID, post method, and it's going to be a multi-part form data. So with that in place, we can then go ahead and add in our CSRF token. That makes sure that the data is coming from an authorized source, in this case, our form on our website. And then in addition to that, we can then go ahead and think about hidden fields. So this might be utilized to handle errors differently in the form. And again, I'll try and add some links in the video description. That would take you to the forms page. Let me just quickly grab it. And that will give you more information with working with forms. It's well worth going through and having a read of this page, skimming through. And although you're not going to potentially pick up or remember everything here, it's like a scaffolding approach, isn't it? You're going to pick up something by reading this through. It might just be something that when you're working on a project again, it just might bubble up to the forefront. You might not remember everything, but because you've got that general little spark, that might then take you to this page again. You quickly read it and then you can implement it in your project. And it just gives you a wider view of what is potentially available in your project to help you understand and create better code. Hopefully that made sense. I think it just about made sense for me. Right, so let's go back here and create our field. So form, remember the form is a reference. So let's go back into here in our view. So here, remember, we're sending the data from our form. Remember, the form is the project form. So that project form, remember, the project form is associated to these fields here in our form. So going back here, where are we? Oh, no, in the code. Bear with me. All right, okay, here. That's it. So what we're doing now is looping over those fields. Right, so we're just leaping over those fields. Now, we are building this form manually. You probably already noticed, and that doesn't have to be the case. But when you're working with a setup like this, multiple forms, it can be easy to do that. So here what we've done then, we've looped over the forms, the form fields in the form. That's the project model form fields. And then we've gone ahead and just grabbed those and we've outputted those fields. And then from image form, we've gone ahead and we've got the manage form. So this management underscore form, basically this is going to keep track of how many forms are being utilized. Right, so by all means have a look at the documentation for that, but essentially that's going to allow us to add multiple forms and keep track of it. So here then we're going to now utilize image form. So remember, this is a reference point back into our views for the field data for the image form. So remember, there's only one field there where we're utilizing. If we go back into our form, there's only one field, the image field. So that's what we're going to try and now output there. There we go. And then we just output that. And then we end that. And then last of all, we then have the button, the submit button, submit, submit, submit. And there we go. So that's what our final field form will look like. And I think we're ready to go. So let's just refresh the page here. We can now see we have a few entries. So notice the names have disappeared. You can definitely just add those on. Have a look at managing custom forms and just add those in your loops. And of course, the display and how you want it to be set up, however you want to do that. So let's go ahead and add a new project. So let's just call this project 1. And then we call this P1. I think this is a mandatory field as well. So we can now choose multiple images. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've just got 2 images. So we press submit. It now tells us we need to fill this out. Apologies. This is the slug. So we need to be in slug form. And then we press submit. And there we go. So we created our new project. And now we're going to also notice that we also have our message up here. Well, I'll explain that in a second, how that magically appeared. But let's just go back into our database. Now, if you haven't got the extension installed here, I've got the SQLite extension. I like to tell you on every tutorial I possibly can. I'm not associated to that at all. So if we go back into our project, right click, open database, and then have a look at our database. If we go into the images here, show table, we now have 2 images in our table. Now, in addition to that, if I just drop that down, if we go into the media, we now have 2 images as well. So it was successful. So that's kind of a baseline for you to hopefully start. Let me just quickly talk about the messaging system here. So if you remember in the projects, in our views, we did request a message, a successful message. And with this message, new project added, we did request that. And so what's happened here inside of the templates in the base, what I've done here is I've created this little piece of text here. Now, remember, if you're not familiar with base or base class, base templates, we're extending from the base every time we create a new template. So this is basically a template. And then what we do on every single page, we use this block here to add anything we want to add on our new template. So we use this template, add a new file, and then we extend from here and add our content inside the middle section of this base. That's how we build all these different pages. But maybe that's another tutorial for another day. But essentially, if you want those messages to appear, we just need to request them. So if messages, and then what I've done here, this is using Bootstrap. We've utilized this little bit of text here. Then for each message that we have, we just loop over them and we just output the message. And then that allows you to appear here. Now, if I refresh the page, it will be removed. So it will get shown once until I refresh. You could make a little button which closes it, of course, but that's the message system. So by all means, go ahead and explore that if that's something you're interested in using in your project. So I do hope that was useful. I did elaborate in some areas. I know that it was a little bit short in other areas. I could spend 2 hours talking about that very simple piece of code. We could extend it. By all means, we could extend it in many different ways, depending on your project. But I want to give you a baseline because sometimes you're given too much code. It doesn't make sense. You try to re-engineer that piece of code and you just end up with a bigger mess. By starting with a basic set of code, which you can then extend upon, I think it just makes it a lot easier as a starting point. So thank you very much for listening. And if there is any other requests, I'll happily take requests. If you've got anything else you want to see, then please leave it in the comments, and I hope to see you in another tutorial.